Murder in the lab. 5 days before her wedding day, student Annie Lay disappeared from the secure research lab she worked in on Yale University campus. Even with hours of surveillance footage and keycard records, investigators could not find her. Days later, they would make a gruesome discovery that would confound them and shock the community. Yale University was founded in 1701 and is one of America's oldest and most respected universities. It's an Ivy League school. The campus features several generations worth of architecturally significant buildings, but few would describe the structure at 10 Amistad as substantial. In fact, the building was designed to not stand out. 10 Amistad is a nondescript building used as a research facility. Behind its flat brick facade, all sorts of confidential, multi-million-dollar research is conducted, backed by organizations, companies, and foundations worldwide. One of the researchers was Annie Lay, a 24-year-old grad student on a doctoral track. Annie was born on July 3, 1985, in San Jose, California, to a Vietnamese-American family. It was there that she spent her childhood with her aunt and uncle. Annie was incredibly intelligent. She was valedictorian of her graduating class at Union Mine High School in El Dorado, California. After earning approximately $160,000 in scholarship money, she attended and graduated from the University of Rochester, New York. Her major was cell developmental biology with a minor in medical anthropology. Annie was thrilled when she was accepted into a graduate program at Yale that would have led her to earning a doctorate in pharmacology. Her research had applications in the treatment of diabetes and certain forms of cancer. She was due to be married on September 13, 2009 in Syosset, New York. In a horribly ironic twist, Annie wrote an article for Yale's medical school magazine entitled Crime and Safety in New Haven, published in February 2009. She had a very strict routine, with very little time for recreational partying. She went to work at the lab every day, she studied, and went back home. That was it. On the morning of Tuesday, September 8, 2009, Annie went about her usual routine. She went to work. The building where she worked required an electronic key card to enter, which she of course swiped, and that was recorded. Then she went to her lab located in room G13 and logged into her computer at around 10 a.m. that morning. At 11 p.m., Annie was not home, nor did she call. Her roommate immediately called the police. They began searching for Annie right away, but the police thought with her wedding just 5 days away that she might have gotten cold feet. But this theory was quickly ruled out. The police found no credit card or phone activity since the last time anyone had seen her. Her purse and cell phone were found in her office. After ruling out Annie leaving on her own, investigators began going through the building's surveillance footage. There were about 70 security cameras around the building that covered every exit and entrance around the building, which meant no one could get in or get out without being noticed. Investigators saw Annie enter the building with a brown skirt and green blouse, but didn't see her come out. Days passed with no sign of Annie. Investigators had to come to the realization that something had happened to her. She was less than 5 feet tall and weighed under 100 pounds. So police thought that someone had attacked her from inside the building and taken her out in one of the large garbage receptacles inside. The dumpsters were checked, and investigators even combed through the dump where there was no evidence Annie had been there. Yale and the city of New Haven were desperate for answers after Annie vanished. With no logical explanation for her disappearance, investigators turned to a darker theory on what might have happened to her. They now considered everyone a suspect, including her friends, her roommate, her family, and her fiancé. Her fiancé was attending school in New York, which was about 90 minutes away, but he had a solid alibi and they believed he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Then on Sunday, September the 13th, 5 days after her disappearance, detectives were called to the basement bathroom of the Amistad building. When they entered, the detectives immediately caught the scent of decomposition. Behind a 13-inch metal wall panel, they found Annie Lay's body. She had been sexually assaulted and stuffed behind the wall. Her jaw and collarbone had been broken in the violent struggle. She was still wearing the blue surgical gloves indicating she had been working when she was attacked and was caught off guard. There was no murder weapon recovered, and it appeared that the killer had used their bare hands. The coroner ruled that the cause of death was traumatic asphyxia due to the neck compression. The pressure was on to find the person who killed Annie and to figure out how they attacked her in the highly secure building. The Yale police, the New Haven police, and the FBI teamed up to figure out what evidence they had. Dozens of items were found with the body and were sent for forensic analysis. But one of the items looked out of place. Under Annie's body was a green pen, which turned out to be a very important piece of evidence. DNA tests were done on the items in the wall, including Annie's clothes, various other items, and the green pen. Shockingly, DNA from 2 different men was recovered from the area behind the wall. Both DNA samples were run through CODIS, and detectives were very optimistic that they would find the killer in the database. Given the levels of violence, it seemed very likely that whoever did this had been violent before, and most likely had a criminal record. Sure enough, they got a hit. A DNA profile came back to a convicted felon, one Kieran Robinson. He'd been convicted on drug charges in 2001. Police thought they had a lead, but it turns out he was part of the team that constructed the building, and he was shot and killed years before Annie's murder. The other DNA profile turned up no matches in the database. Investigators decided to use another security method to hopefully drum up some leads by going through the keycard scanners. They kept track of everyone's movement through the building at all times. Investigators examined activity going back several months before Annie's murder just to see people's routines and if there were any deviations from the routines. And they found one that dramatically changed around her disappearance. They saw one man who repeatedly went into Annie's research area using his keycard. He was the last person that swiped into the lab on the morning she disappeared. They also found that shortly before Annie went missing, a fire alarm went off inside the Amistad building. It turned out to be a false alarm, but everyone was forced to evacuate the building. The footage was viewed repeatedly by detectives, and Annie Lay never left the building when the alarm sounded at 12:55 p.m. Investigators know that Annie was most likely dead at the time the fire alarm went off, and they are able to get a better timeline of the day. Keycard records show that room G13 was Annie's last known location, and inside that room some interesting things began popping up. An employee called police in after finding what looked like blood spatter on a box of disinfectant wipes. It turned out that it was blood, and there was no reason for blood to be in that particular room. She wasn't working with blood, so there is no reason for it to be found there. The blood was sent off for forensic analysis, and while they waited for the results, detectives decided to guard the room. The police presence didn't seem to deter an employee named Raymond Clark, who very brazenly attempted to handle the bloody box right in front of them. So who is Raymond Clark? Well, he was a 24-year-old lab technician who, like Annie, was also engaged. He was not a student but a Yale employee who took care of the animals in various experiments. Clark was not squeaky clean. One of his former girlfriends had made reports of domestic violence. Keycard activity showed that Clark had been in the G13 lab at the same time as Annie. They were in there alone with no one else. He entered the room and stayed there approximately 46 minutes, which was not unusual. But since it appeared that Clark was likely the last person to see Annie alive, he was brought in for questioning. Raymond Clark was cooperative. But detectives went back to the surveillance footage of the building being evacuated, and they saw something that raised eyebrows. They saw Clark exit the building and walk across the street where he sat on some stairs looking absolutely distraught. The question to be asked was, why was he this way? Was it a coincidence that he was acting this way just after Annie had been murdered? When first questioned, Clark said he had no idea what happened to her, and that the two of them were just co-workers and nothing more. But on the day of the murder, Clark had a lot of keycard activity showing he moved around a lot. He moved back and forth between G13 to a barely used storage facility in G22. He went in and out of these rooms 11 times. Detectives were convinced that room G22 would connect Raymond Clark with the murder of Annie Lai. They searched the floor of G22 and found the typical dirt and debris, but they also found a brown bead with a hole in it. On surveillance footage, Annie could be seen wearing a brown beaded necklace. Even more damning is that Annie's keycard showed that she had never swiped into that room herself. Then above the ceiling tiles in the storage room, detectives found a bloody sock and glove. Everything, including the ceiling tiles, was sent for testing, and it was found to be covered in Annie's blood and DNA from Raymond Clark. Even more evidence was found in a laundry bag that had never been searched. Detectives dumped the bag and found dark blue scrub pants caked in blood. The pants contained a mixture of Annie's blood and semen later matched to Raymond Clark. Even the green pen implicated Clark, as he signed in and out of the logbooks using a green-colored pen that was also green inked. In the middle of the day, the logbook showed that he switched to a pen that used black ink. Detectives believe that he dropped the pen while stuffing Annie's body behind the bathroom wall panel. All of the detectives felt confident it was Raymond Clark who murdered Annie Lai. Further proof came from a physical examination of Clark, which showed massive bruises and cuts. After his arrest, Clark was held on $3 million bail at McDougal Walker Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in Suffield, Connecticut. He appeared in Connecticut Superior Court on October 6, 2009, but he did not enter a plea to the charges. His hearing was delayed until January 26, 2010, since not all of the materials in the case had been made available to the lawyers. Clark initially pled not guilty on January 26th. His pretrial hearing was scheduled for March 3, 2010 in New Haven, with pretrial evidence processing scheduled for July 26th. In October 2010, Clark's case was continued, and another hearing was scheduled for February 9, 2011. In March 2011, Clark entered a guilty plea in Lai's murder in exchange for a 44-year prison term. On an additional charge of attempted sexual assault of Lai, he entered an Alford plea that does not admit facts, but concedes to the sufficiency of the evidence against him. Clark officially entered the pleas on March 17th, and he was formally sentenced to 44 years imprisonment on June 3rd. While Clark expressed great remorse at his sentencing, he offered no explanation for the attack and no motive was given. Clark is serving his sentence at the Cheshire Correctional Institution and is scheduled for release on September 16, 2053.